once again, thank you so much for joining us. I'm David Mainville. I'm the CEO and co-founder here at Navia, and it's my pleasure to have you join us today. For those of you who are not familiar with our company, Navia has a SaaS product used to design, document, and assess your IT and business processes. If you'd like to learn more about our product, why don't you hop up to g2.com? You can check out our reviews. You can also go to navia.com and learn about the company there. So I just want to give you a little bit of background on myself and why I'm able to talk about this subject of ITSM and security. And I think I bring a unique perspective. I think I have a 360-degree perspective from a variety of situations. So first of all, I have an extensive ITSM experience. I mean, I really started my career in IT service management many years ago. As a practitioner, I got really involved with a lot of the operational processes, incident, problem, change, configuration management, the service support processes as well. As a consultant, I worked at many organizations across North America, helping them assess and design processes, companies like the New York Stock Exchange, Bank of New York Mellon. And as the co-founder of Navia, we introduced a SaaS product into the marketplace that helps companies design, document, and manage their processes. Also have a lot of experience with implementation of the Navia product as user story management as well, and understanding how process connects to user stories and connects to the actual implementation of supporting tools. So a lot of ITSM experience, but I also have a lot of security and compliance experience as well. I have hands-on experience as a security compliance analyst. I've done countless numbers of security reviews, pulling together all the documentation, looking at the controls, providing evidence of compliance. So I'm familiar with a variety of different frameworks, be that the NIST frameworks, ISO 27002, familiar with things like COBIT. So a lot of experience actually responding to security reviews and providing the correct evidence in support of controls. But I'm also the process owner for compliance and risk management here at Navia. And in that role, not only do I oversee it, but I've actually developed our own internal risk management process. I developed our own internal InfoSec process and a number of the supporting processes for that. Also the policies and procedures that go around that area. And from a leadership and accountability perspective, as the CEO of Navia, I fully understand the impact of security breach. I mean, what it could do to a company's reputation, not only the reputation, but the potential financial costs of having a security breach. And because of my background, we take security really seriously here at Navia. And, I look at it as the buck stops with me, right? So I'm very much involved with the teams here at Navia, ensuring that security is factored into everything that we do. I do have an interesting observation, though. We have an impeccable security record. We've never failed a security audit. We do pen tests all the time. We do vulnerability scanning all the time. We're always in a very good position. But, as a company who also deals, with our clients, only a third of the companies we deal with actually require a security review as part of the product onboarding, which is interesting because, we are part of a supply chain in the organization. And you'll see as we get through some of the discussions here today, you'll see that, security, there's a lot of links in the security chain, so to speak, and suppliers are one of those links. And the security of your supply chain is just as critical as the security of your own internal infrastructure. So anyway, just a little interesting observation from my perspective. So I know everyone on this call today understands the importance of security, and I'm not here to tell you how important security is. It goes without saying that security is critical. But I do want to lay a little bit of the business case and a little bit of background before I get into how to use ITSM and NIST to assess your overall security posture. So you can just sort of read through some of these yourselves, but whether it's PwC or Gartner or CIO Magazine or the Association of State CIOs, security is at the top of everybody's mind. And it, obviously, right? I mean, you can hear, you just have to read the paper to know how important security is. You just have to look at your own personal lives with things like identity threat to understand how important that security is. But if you look at the sort of a list of the top priorities for CIOs, security is in the top 3 of all those lists, if not the top priority. So having a good, having the right framework to support security and to assess security capability is very much in alignment with what your CIO is looking for, and ultimately the CEO as well. One evidence of how important this area is just how quickly the growth in security spending is, how quickly it's growing. So according to Gartner, global cybersecurity spending is expected to reach about $215 billion in 2024. This is a slightly old statistic, marking an increase of 14.3% from 2023. I looked at some other statistics from Statistica and some other sources, and that number actually for 2024 goes between about $215 and to $267 billion. So a lot of money is being spent in security. Looking ahead, Gartner predicts a 15% increase in security in 2025. And the other sources that I've been looking at are actually predicting similar increases in the security spending. A lot of that security today is spent on technology, the different tools that you have to put in place to secure your environment. But there is a bit of a shift in the market happening. There's a shift towards managed services, where I guess individuals or companies who don't feel they have the in-house expertise to manage their security is outsourcing that to managed service providers. There's also a lot more focus on compliance and risk management. So whether it's, for example, to be GDPR compliant, or perhaps you're a vendor selling into the federal government in the US, perhaps into the defense industry, you need certain certifications to be able to do that, and you need to be compliant against certain standards. There's a big shift in that as well, but that's driving a lot of the spending and the increased focus. And the other shift that we're seeing is the integration of AI and machine learning in helping to protect your environment. So, we're seeing that increase in spending. We're seeing the awareness, but we're also seeing cyber attacks. So I want to touch on 3 pretty serious attacks in 2024. So these are recent. So in 2024, there was one of the most severe critical infrastructure breaches in terms of the government. Then that was the extensive cyber espionage campaign conducted by a Chinese hacking group known as Salt Typhoon. What they did is they managed to go in and infiltrate the network, the telecommunications network, by accessing unpatched routers. So there's these routers, they weren't maintained, they weren't patched, they were able to infiltrate the network. And as a result of that, they were able to access call and metadata for calls across the major telecommunications companies in the US. They were able to access the US wiretapping, the federal wiretapping service. So, if you're looking at criminals and you're putting a wiretap, they had access to that system. And they actually were accessing the telecommunications data of the candidates in the last election. So pretty serious breach. And it was the result of misconfiguration or mismanagement of routers. And that's definitely something that organizations should be on top of, is keeping their routers and their infrastructure patched and maintained. An extensive, FBI was involved. All the agencies were involved in this because it was extremely serious. A lot of people don't know about it, but it was a pretty significant breach. Another one that happened in 2024 was to United Health Group. They paid a $22 million ransom after a breach exposed patient data and disrupted medical services nationwide, revealing critical healthcare vulnerabilities. Now, this was due to somebody being able to access passwords. So weak passwords allowed them to get into the system, and through those weak passwords, they were able to inject ransomware into the system, which basically disrupted the whole operation. The end result, though, was quite severe. Not only the $22 million ransom, but estimates put the cost of this breach close to $3 billion. $3 billion. Not only did it, affect the reputation of the healthcare group, it opened them up to lawsuits and all kinds of repercussions. Regulatory bodies got involved, et cetera. So, here's an example of poor password management resulted in that serious situation. And then we have financial services. So in mid-2024, again, another recent one, Fidelity Investments reported a data breach affecting 77,000 customers. The compromised information included social security numbers and driver's license details. Pretty much all you need to open up a credit card in somebody else's name. And that, again, was caused by somebody being able to get in, they compromised the system, and they were able to open their own administrative account into the system. And then that allowed them to access image data for the social security numbers and the driver's license details. So again, another sort of password credential related issue. And all of these things, whether it's, managing your servers, whether it's managing your passwords and your credentials, good policies and good controls around that could have prevented these breaches before they happened. And, they keep coming, right? There's been an increase in cyber attacks. The second quarter of 2024 saw a 30% increase in cyber attacks. The escalation of phishing and social engineering, with 42% of organizations reporting such incidents from the World Economic Forum. AI-driven threats, that's getting a lot more focus these days. Ransomware attacks increased 81% year over year, based on research done by the University of San Diego from 2023 to 2024. Internet of Things, that's increasing the attack surface. So with more things connected to the networks, you basically have more weaknesses that you can get in. And a SonicWall cyber threat report noted an approximately 107% surge in IoT malware attacks during the year. And the financial impact, I mentioned some pretty serious numbers in the last slide, but the financial impact is averaged, based on a report from IBM, is averaged to be $4.8 million. So that's pretty serious money. And you think about all the things you have to do, right? So somebody breaches your environment, there's all the mitigation you have to do to, resolve whatever weaknesses that you had in the environment. You have to buy more equipment, you have to get more resources and people. Then there's whatever you have to pay out in terms of, for example, Fidelity had to pay out, give everybody of those 77,000 people 2 year of credit score reporting, and also type of they also had to pay for their internet and firewall protection, malware devices. So these costs start adding up. Then you get lawyers involved, and you get class action suits, and you get all of these things. So $4.8 million might be getting off easy compared to what some of those other organizations faced. So these cyber attacks are coming. But I have a question for you. If executive awareness and spending is up, why is it that the breaches and threats keep coming? And just looking back, at the ones that I outlined just a few minutes ago, some of those things could have been easily addressed in advance by following basic IT procedures. Patching your routers, making sure you have two-factor authentication in place for your security credentials. So, because of those gaps, I think we have to consider a new approach, because technology alone, which everyone seems to be relying on for protecting themselves in the security environment, is not enough. So let's just take a moment and let's take a look at what's at the root of most cybersecurity incidents. So this list was compiled from various sources, including Gartner, McKinsey & Company, and various internet security reports that I've been reading. But these are on the top of everybody's list as the most common root causes of issues. So social engineering. Somebody manages to convince you or trick you into believing, you're their manager, and you hand over information which allows you to get into the system. It could be weak or stolen passwords, which was probably at the root cause of two of the incidents I spoke to a moment ago. It could be unpatched systems. Again, there are procedures in place to patch the systems. There's change management and configuration management processes involved, and unpatched systems are a root cause of most of the cyber. These things are all root causes of most of the cyber threats. Insider threats. Somebody within the organization stealing data and leaking it out. So what kind of data loss protection policies and practices do you have in place? Misconfigured settings. So when you're installing servers, are you disabling all the non-essential ports? Are you taking away all the default passwords? It's basically security by design. Are you doing the right things when you're configuring your environment? Ransomware and malware, another root cause of a lot of those threats. Supply chain vulnerability. I mentioned it to you before. I'm kind of surprised that a number of people, when they onboard our product, don't put us through a more security review. Some put us through a pretty big, I remember one came in not too long ago, 250 questions or more, probably hundreds of pages of supporting evidentiary documentation, results of our pen tests, results of our vulnerability scanning, screenshots of our SCIM system. Like a lot of evidence had to go along with proving as part of that we're a good partner and that we deserve to be part of the supply chain. And zero-day exploits, not jumping on. So that's all to do with risk management and threat intelligence. So are you monitoring for zero-day exploits? This exploit came out today. Are you going to jump on it fast enough to protect it? So if you don't have good sources of threat information, which is should be part of your risk management process, you might not know these exploits are happening till weeks later, and that leaves a window of opportunity for hackers to get into the system. So if you look at all of these, right, social engineering, misconfigured settings, supply chain vulnerabilities, what's the root cause? And I'd submit it's people and process. These things, there could be some technology around this that can help you manage these areas. There's some technology you could put in place, to shore up some of these areas like multi-factor authentication or, mobile device management systems. But in the end, it's the people who configure those systems, install those systems, manage and operate those systems. It's your change management processes and your service validation and testing processes, and all of these things that together, will help prevent the policies and process that will help prevent these things happening before they become a serious threat. The industry has invested billions in cybersecurity technology, which is great. You can't do this without technology, especially with the introduction of AI, not only as a defensive measure, but AI as an offensive weapon. So, spending the money is important and having good technology is important, but you can't do it without focusing a little bit more on people and processes. So that's why I want to talk to you today about the NIST Cybersecurity Framework and ITSM and how the two work together for cybersecurity. So what is the NIST Cybersecurity Framework? Well, the NIST CSF is a leading information security management system. So what's that? It's a set of best practices of how you should have security in your own environment. These things, so other information security management systems you might be familiar with. There's the International Standards Organization, ISO 27001, 27002. You've got industry-specific frameworks like HITRUST. You have HIPAA. You have PCI for the payment card industry. So there's a variety of different frameworks out there that are called information security management systems, but NIST is in fact one of the leading ones. And what NIST does is it tells you the desired outcomes. What are you supposed to achieve? It's not too much focused on how you'd have to do it, but it really focuses on the outcomes. What is it you're trying to achieve in order to protect your environment? Then you have IT service management, which is a set of best practices for the management of IT services. Those actually are the processes that support the outcomes. So just going back to one of the breaches from earlier on, if you fail to update your servers, that's a failure in infrastructure management. And there's a number of processes and practices within infrastructure management, including asset management, configuration management, that really help you, ensure that you've got those assets protected. But if you don't have the underlying processes and the underlying discipline in place, you're not going to be able to meet the outcomes. So what's nice here is NIST tells you, here's all the things you should have in place to have a secure environment. But without good ITSM processes, you're not going to have the operating, efficiencies and the practices to actually reach those outcomes. And just from my experience, there's often a disconnect between the ITSM folks and the InfoSec folks. It's almost seemed like the InfoSec is this other area, this other group, this other black box, but it has to work in harmony with IT service management if you're really going to protect the environment. So let's talk a little bit about NIST. So NIST is very, very comprehensive. So the NIST Cybersecurity Framework takes guidance from a number of other NIST guidelines. So there's something called the 800 series of NIST documentation, if you will. There's 4 very comprehensive documents in the 800 series around risk management. There's documents on privacy. There's documents on protecting critical infrastructure. There's a whole, thousands and thousands of pages of detailed information in spreadsheets and controls that actually are been distilled, if you will, into the NIST Cybersecurity Framework to make it a little bit easier. So when you look at NIST, it's presented in a way that's easily digestible, but it's based on a lot of really good supporting information. So extremely comprehensive. It's internationally recognized. It was developed in the USA, of course, by the national standards by NIST, the National Association of Standards and Technology. It has international recognition across Europe, including the UK, Asia Pacific, including Singapore and Australia, comes to mind, and in Canada. And many of these other countries look at this framework and say it's very comprehensive and have either recognized it as something they can use or have actually incorporated it into their own, security regulations. So internationally recognized. It's scalable and cost effective. So there's a concept in NIST called tiers and profiles. So tiers is sort of maturity, if you will. Let me try to explain it this way. So if you're a very small organization, a mom and pop shop, maybe you have a server in place for taking, people's credit card payments and that sort of thing. You can do all the things that are in NIST, but how you do it, the amount of technology, the resources, whether it's automated or manual, that's up to you and based on the complexity and the specific requirements of your own organization. So they're just telling you what you're supposed to achieve. So for example, there's a NIST control that says, you shouldn't hand off a password and credentials to somebody without validating who they are first. Well, in some organizations, there could be, an access management technology in place to do that. In a smaller organization, maybe the policy in the smaller organization is only managers can hand off the credential and passwords to an employee once they validate their identity. So you can achieve the same outcome, which makes this scalable and cost effective. But you can, depending on the size of your organization, how you do it will vary. And there's guidance within the NIST standards that actually help you determine that. It's widely adopted across industries and sectors. So it's recognized across critical infrastructure, finance, government, healthcare, manufacturing, retail, technology, telecommunications, and it really provides all of those sectors and industries with best practices. In many state governments have been required to adopt the NIST framework. It's a requirement in the federal government. It sort of lines up very nicely with the CMC2. If you're familiar, in the US, vendors have to achieve a certain level of maturity before you can do business with Department of Defense or other governmental agencies. So it works very well within that framework as well. But what's great about this is, it's widely accepted, it's very scalable, cost effective, and it's just extremely comprehensive. The NIST framework, and I'll get into that in a little bit more detail in a moment, but it encompasses 6 functions. So 6 main categories that you need to protect. Those 6 functions are broken down into 30 categories, and the 30 categories are broken down into 104 subcategories, or the individual outcomes that you're trying to achieve. So it's very detailed and it's widely accepted. So that's a little bit about NIST. People often ask, what does ITSM have to do with security? Well, ITSM is great. Everyone, I think a lot of people on this call might be familiar with ITSM from a infrastructure management or just an IT management perspective. Processes, people, organization, technology, automation, governance, continual service improvement. So it's that whole system that allows you to align IT service with your business goals. But I often say to people, virtually every process in ITSM supports security, right across the entire service lifecycle, from design through to deployment, actually starting with strategy. So, if you're strategizing, whether you're building a system in-house that you're going to, eventually deploy, or you're even bringing in a vendor, from a strategy perspective, you need to ensure that security is built into the services from inception. So you might look at some of the processes that help you, maybe even starting as early with business requirements management. In service design, you're talking about designing and doing the software development work. So you got to make sure that you're building the security into the solutions that you're going to be deploying, making sure you do the proper unit testing for security, making sure you have both static and dynamic testing in place to ensure that those systems are secure. You want to do everything you can as you're building and getting a solution ready for deployment to reduce the vulnerabilities before they're deployed. But then when you transition the services, you want to minimize the security risks. And that's why things like service validation and testing, release management, change management, these processes come into play, because what you're trying to do is ask those questions along, before you put that into production, and actually follow up after it's in production. But, have you addressed, are we do some testing here around security? What kind of security testing? What's the vulnerabilities? You always might have some, but how are they prioritized? Is this more of an informational risk, or is this a critical risk? And how do we prioritize that in terms of getting it addressed? In service operations, well, these are the folks, man, that manage the infrastructure. Do you have the right firewalls, intrusion protection devices, mobile device management systems, and the processes to go around all that? Do you have good configuration management? Do you have, the ability to detect and monitor for security threats? So do you have the right security monitoring tools in place in service operations to ensure that your environment is protected? And then, of course, a big component of ITSM is continual service improvement. And ITSM allows you to adapt to emerging threats, because you're always looking at improving your processes so you can make security a continuous priority and address anything that's emerging. So while NIST says what you're trying to achieve, it's actually the ITSM processes that helps get you there. You can't manage your security program purely on controls and technology. One of the controls might be, do you have an asset inventory? So somebody comes along and says, yep, here's my asset inventory. Well, is that up to date? How regularly do you update the inventory? Do you manage your inventory from cradle to grave? Like, there's a lot that goes into IT asset management. And just showing the evidence that you have an asset inventory isn't always enough to prove that you have a process in place that's going to make that sustainable. And that goes for all the processes that I've been talking about. Those processes need to be in place and need to, have that connection into security so that you have the underlying processes to meet the outcomes of the NIST environment, of the NIST framework. So I'm going to just spend a moment going a little bit deeper into how NIST aligns with ITSM. So I mentioned before, NIST has that 6 functions, the 30 categories, and the 106, I believe, subcategories. So let's sort of take a walk down that path. So starting with the functions, you've got identify. So the purpose of identify in the NIST framework is basically asking the question, does the organization understand its current risks? That's what identify does. So how do you do that? Well, in ITSM, there's a process called risk management. And the risk management process, starts with understanding the risk landscape, identifying the risks that are facing you, assessing the likelihood of that risk affecting you, the impact of that risk affecting you, recording those risks in a risk register, taking the risks and developing mitigation plans. That might be just one plan might be getting insurance. Another plan might be installing technology and processes, and then managing those risks on an ongoing basis. So there's an actual risk management process in ITSM, and that completely supports the identify part of the NIST framework. And then there's IT asset management. What assets are you trying to protect? And this could be both physical and logical assets. So data centers fall into that as well. So, what are you trying to protect? And then do you understand the risks for those assets? Have you categorized those assets? Which of those assets can present the most risk to the organization? So identify, do I understand, what's there? Protect, well, that's about making sure you have all of the right things in place to protect threats from happening. And I said before, virtually every ITSM process, supports security in one way or another. What I tried to do here is take the ones that are most directly related. So I didn't put, like, for example, business requirements management in here, because business requirements management feeds the software development process. And I see that more as a secondary process, so to speak. But here on Protect, software development and management is important because you got to be ensuring you're not building vulnerabilities into your software. Release management, validation, and testing, they all help protect the environment by making sure what you're putting into the environment is in good shape. Infrastructure management, also very important for protecting that's where a lot of the technology lives that monitors and safeguards the environment. Then you have detect. Monitoring and event management plays a very important role here. Do you have a security information event management system in place? Are you correlating all of these events? Are you keeping logs of information so if a security breach happens, you have the evidence that you can share with the authorities that all the steps that led up to the breach and what you did to contain that breach going forward. So monitoring and event management is not only the alerts, but it's all the logs. It's actually having the processes in place that people go and look at the logs, or you have some technology to help analyze the logs. But all of that has to happen as part of detect. Respond is incident management, making sure you have the steps in place to respond to an incident. And it starts with once you've detected an incident, you've got to assess its impact to the organization. You have to try to contain so you want to keep the spread of the security breach from happening. You want to contain it. You want to mitigate it. You want to remediate it. You've got to have to do all the right communication to people to let them know what's going on. And some of that might be to external stakeholders, letting them know a breach occurred and what you're doing to resolve it. Getting authorities involved. You might have to get the police or other investigative bodies involved in the process. So you got incident management as helping support the response function. You've got the recover function, so service continuity management. If you've been locked out of some key systems, perhaps you're able to restore those into spin up a new environment in Azure and restore to that environment. you need good service continuity and business resumption plans in place to be able to do that. And then lastly, there's a piece called govern. And govern is really all the policies and strategy, making sure everybody's communicated, everybody's aware. So govern is basically how you oversee the other 5 functions. And for that, the ITSM information security management process is critical because that sets up the roles and responsibilities and the policies and gets you into the procedures for information security management. And then supplier management also plays a big piece here because, as I said earlier, you're only as strong as the weakest link in the chain. So supplier management falls. So this is how I see the NIST framework aligning to ITSM. NIST says, here's the things you should do, but it's ITSM that gives you the processes to do it. Let's take it down another level. So let's look at one of the functions of NIST. So one of the functions of NIST is identified. So is the organization's current cybersecurity risks understood? So there's asset management, risk management, and something called improvement that fall into that function. Well, let's take a look at risk assessment. So the function is identify. The category is risk assessment, so ID.RA. And then there are all of the roughly 10, I think there's 10 there, yeah, the 10 different specific subcategories that fall under. So have you identified your vulnerabilities? Do you have cyber threat intelligence? Do you are internal and external threats identified and recorded? Are potential impacts and likelihoods of threats identified? Are the likelihood and impacts, do you use that to inform the prioritization of your risk response? So you can go through this list here, but these are all the things you need to do to support risk assessment. Well, let's take a look at IDRA 03. There's actual processes that can help you support that outcome, which furthermore rolls up to the function of identify. So this is a cross-functional flow diagram from a risk assessment process. It's got 5 activities, but I'm focusing on risk identification and assessment activity. So you've got the various steps, and behind those boxes are more detailed task descriptions. And you would have in the RACI chart below the roles and responsibilities. And behind the RACI chart, you would have actual duties that people need to perform that actually support RDA 03, which furthermore go up to support IDRA, which supports the identify function. So there's a little bit of a tighter relationship between the NIST framework and the processes. And I can make this relationship for all of those 12 processes I identified on one of the previous slides. You can find exact places in your ITSM flowcharts or your functional flows that correspond with an outcome. A lot of people confuse process with procedure, right? So a process is designed to be adaptable across different organizational structures and technologies. If I'm a small organization and I want to do change management, I could follow all the steps of identifying a change, assessing a change, scheduling a change, having a backup plan for my change, implementing my change, and communicating the results of the change. In a really small organization, using maybe something like a fresh service, a very simple ITSM tool with a very simple process. But that same steps can apply to the most complex organization. Different technologies will apply, different approval levels, different policies might apply, stringency. So don't confuse process and procedure. But having the process in place means you're doing all of the right things to support the outcomes of the NIST framework. And when you look at a process like our risk management process, we've got a description. We have the goals, the objectives, the roles, the RACI charts for showing the roles and responsibilities. We have a glossary of terms because maybe not everybody knows what a certain terms within risk management means, like likelihood or risk appetite, for example. Inputs and outputs, activities, workflow diagrams, the task descriptions and the procedures below those workflow diagrams. So now you're getting into the actual operational of your organization. You're taking you're taking best practice in risk management, now applying it to you through task descriptions, procedures. And then you have your controls, how you're going to govern this process, your metrics, how you're going to measure the process, and the policies, which is also part of governance. So it's basically the processes here can help drive, and these processes will help drive the procedures, the automation, and governance of the risk management process, so you can support the outcomes required from the NIST framework. So NIST, again, it informs you of what you need to do from a security perspective. The ITSM processes support those various outcomes. So how do you go about assessing security with NIST Cybersecurity Framework and ITSM? So these are just some high-level bullet points here. First of all, you want to determine what you want to assess. Are you going to assess all 6 functions? Are you going to focus on a particular function? Maybe because it's the other thing about the NIST framework, which I might not have mentioned, is they also try to align it functionally within your organization. So the people who the people who set the strategy and the policies, they're more concerned with the govern function, GV. People who are responsible for responding to security incidents are more they're in the detect and response part of the framework. So you want to determine the scope. You're going to do it all. You're going to focus on a specific area, a specific a function in the organization. Get your project plan in place. There's a lot of ways you can assess the maturity and capability. There's a lot of guidance in the NIST framework. There's implementation examples. There's just a whole wealth of information on the website, the National Institute of Standards and Technology. So you can download a lot of great documentation that can help you. But you might want to do some interviews. You might want to do workshops. Interviews let you go really deep with subject matter experts. Workshops allow you to get a group of people in a similar role together where you can get more discussion and maybe dig a little bit deeper. I always remember one workshop where we were assessing a particular aspect and one person said, "Oh yeah, we do a great job at that." And someone on the other side of the room, "Really? I had no idea we did that." So workshops are great because you can bring different people together and actually discuss and have some additional information provided. Questionnaires are great because they can go really broad and get a lot of information in an effective way. You might want to review documentation, do some on-site observations. Again, someone says, "Oh yeah, we've got an asset management process," and all they really have, is a database of assets which you don't even know are up to date. So, documentation and on-site observations are also a good part in performing an assessment. And then, once you get all that information in, you want to look at analyzing, coming up with findings and recommendations, and creating a roadmap to resolve. I don't want to spend a whole lot of time here specifically on the assessment piece because we've got a whole bunch of great resources on our website, including a recorded webinar on how to perform an assessment, as well as articles and blog posts on assessment. So if you go to navia.com/blog, if you have the slides later on, you can just click on this link, and I've already it has a built-in search and it'll list you all the relevant resources from that link. But this is sort of a good outline of how you can go about doing it. But one of the most flexible tools you have at performing an assessment, in my opinion, is the questionnaires and the reports that you can generate from the data that you collect. So let's talk a little bit about questionnaires and reports. So, but before I get into that, I also want to let you guys know that coming on April 2025, we're going to have a whole set of new survey questionnaires in Navia that actually support this concept of a cybersecurity assessment. We're going to cover all of the NIST functions, spanning the 6 functions, the 30 categories and 104 subcategories. We're going to have newly designed security-focused ITSM assessment questionnaires, so 12 targeted questionnaires that support the NIST framework, custom reports and insights, as well as training and implementation support that can help you if you're going to be doing an assessment of your own. We'll give you some tools that you could use to make that assessment a little bit easier. If you want any more information about that specifically, you can contact Carl Beach at navia.com. Again, that'll be in the slides, so you'll be able to reach out to him if you're interested in that. But the concept here applies whether you're using a tool like Navia or you're taking your own standalone approach. Questionnaires and reports are so valuable. Survey questionnaires are a great and effective way to gather information. They're scalable because they can reach a wide audience efficiently. So you distribute them, you're talking to a lot of people. They're standardized, which ensures consistency in data collection. So, it's not free form where you got to analyze everyone's response. You're asking very specific questions. And they're flexible because if designed right, they can capture both structured responses. So tell me what, respond to the answer. Are you doing it? Are you not doing it? And then provide comments. Well, if you're not doing it, what aspects are missing? If you're doing it, if you're doing part of it, well, what aspects are you working on? So the comments and the structured responses together can really help you with information for your analysis. You can really maximize the impact of the questionnaires. See, what I used to do, and I've done my share ITSM assessments in the day, I always use the questionnaires in a variety, in multiple ways. First of all, I would use questionnaires to segment respondents. So if you send up if you interviewed 20 people, not everyone's going to have the same perspective. And quite often that perspective might differ by their role or function in the organization. Management might have a certain perspective. If you're assessing the asset management process, well, the people responsible for that process will have a certain perspective. And then if you're a user of that process, you might have a different perspective. So segmenting respondents by role or function can help you gain deeper insights, because what might look on the surface as being pretty good, there might be some gaps. And I always use the questionnaires in multiple ways. So I would, send them out to individuals and then collect those responses. So that's great if you want to get a broad-based look at things. But I also use the questionnaires to facilitate discussions. So, sometimes I would throw them up on a screen and I'd go through question by question. So same questions you might be asking a person, an individual, but in a workshop, you can facilitate more discussion and just get a different perspective of things. And then also you can use them in a deep dive interview. You're asking the same questions, but now you're going a little bit deeper. You have the opportunity to ask follow-on questions. Just sending out a questionnaire, you'll get a response, but you might want to say, well, given that you said that, what about this? So using them as structure for in-depth interviews is also a very good way to use questionnaires. Reports are a great way of visualizing the information. So radar charts I find very useful in organizing data by domain. Above the 6 NIST functions, where am I the strongest, where am I the weakest? Bar charts play a great role in looking at roles. What did management say versus the subject matter expert versus the process owner? Heat maps, if you're familiar with that, and we're going to get into some of these in a moment, actually pinpoint specific areas that so you can see gaps at a much more granular level. And then, if you design your questionnaires correctly, the comments provide a little bit of color to the qualitative data. So you have quantitative and your qualitative data. So it provides a little color to the responses that come back in. So here's an example of a questionnaire you might go out. So for the questionnaires that we're building, we're using a well-known approach. It talks about, rather than saying, on a level of 1 to 5, what do you think of the process? You're basically asking, are you achieving this outcome or not? So is it not done? Is it partially done? Is it largely done? Or is it fully done? And if it's partially done, that'll prompt you for follow-up information. If it's largely done, that might also prompt you for some information. And then what you do is you take a look at the question, you read the question, and then through the check ifs, you get a sense of all the things you have to do for that particular piece of the process. So testing continuity on a regular basis. So are the objectives in place? Do you have stakeholder exercises? Are roles and responsibilities defined? Is there a post-exercise debriefing? You want to look at all of those things, because all of those things mean you're performing that particular part of the process correctly. So is it not done, partially done, largely done, or fully done? And in the NIST, same thing. Are external threats to the organization identified and recorded? So we have a threat identification process. We have threat documentation. We do regular reviews of the information. So based on that, you'll get information that you can then plot and identify where those gaps might be. So again, you might have a radar chart for NIST that shows you, oh, I'm a little weak in protect. I'm a little weak in govern. Not so bad with identify, detect, and respond. So if I'm going to create a roadmap, I'm going to want to focus perhaps on protect or maybe govern. But you can set up your roadmap and base it based on these outcomes. Or if you want to see how the underlying ITSM processes are performing, you can do the same thing with the ITSM processes, see which processes are the weakest, which are the strongest, to help inform your roadmap. Also, by grouping the information on the same reports, you can see some gaps as well. So here on the first one, we have the same 6 functions of NIST outlined, but it's segmented by management and subject matter expert, for example. So you get a score for the entire group, and then you can also get individual scores for each of the management areas for each of the functions within NIST. And if I want to dive a little bit deeper into a function of NIST, I can look at the categories report, which is up here. So the categories report shows me all the different categories. So you have supply chain and you have roles and responsibilities and the different parts of the of govern, and you can see how well you're doing, across management and subject matter experts. And then if you want to dive in even more, you can see all the subcategories for NIST, showing you how well you're doing. Again, in this example, we have management. Management is plotted separately than everyone else, but you can then look at the individual. So, what management says that for the outcome GBOC05, we had 100% attainment. When you look at the average of scores, it's a little more like 80%. So these reports can help you, drill in a little bit deeper. But if you really want to go deep, that's where the heat maps come in, because the heat maps allow you to go in and basically look how well you're obtaining the outcomes in the various functions. And then you can go into a particular function and see how well you're doing across all of the various outcomes. And the color coding corresponds with the questionnaires. Is it not done, partially done, largely done, or fully done? So you might want to focus on the red first, because that identifies what's not being done. And then you might want to go into the yellow, because that's partially done. So these can help you pinpoint specific areas that you need to address. And the same way we do this for NIST, we do for the ITSM processes, where you can look at a specific process and go across the maturity levels. So, level 1 and 2, are you kind of doing the process? But level 3, 4, and 5, are you measuring it? Are you analyzing it? Are you continually improving it? So this gives you the maturity levels of your ITSM processes supporting the NIST framework. So that's a lot of information, that you can get. You distribute these questionnaires. Some of these questionnaires you might have filled out yourself through interviews. Some of these questionnaires you might have taken a consensus scoring based on a workshop. Some of these you are directly from the individuals. All that could be segmented. You can say these are workshop responses, these are individual interview responses, or these are distributed responses. You can bring all that information together, use these reports to identify gaps, and then use the information to analyze. So, I would start by looking at a high level, how am I doing by function? I pick the function that's most important to me, and then look at the categories and subcategories to pinpoint the specific gaps in the expected outcomes. And then I would examine the corresponding processes to identify the operational efficiencies supporting those controls or those outcomes. Segmentation data, I'm a big fan of that, because it can determine if the gaps are concentrated in specific areas of the organization. And then once you understand what your gaps are, you can prioritize them and focus on the critical vulnerabilities in high impact areas. And from that, you can develop your roadmap. So I always say start with establishing a baseline and then perform regular assessments over time and this does a couple of things. Make sure that you're either remaining or at the same level or improving, hopefully not going down. And it also allows you to adapt to changing threats. The threat landscape is changing all the time. AI is now a new concern. So it allows you to adapt to changing threats and to drive continuous improvement. All right, so I'm just going to start wrapping things up here. If there's questions, I'll be able to stick around as long as you guys want and respond to any of the questions that are up there. But some of the key takeaways from taking this approach. It's clear, cybersecurity is a business priority. CIOs must stay ahead of evolving threats, and investment's going to continue to grow. But this is a priority for your CIO and also your CEO. And if you're ITSM folks, I think you have a case to make that you need the right support for the ITSM program because it's so critical in supporting the security program. ITSM strengthens security. ITSM processes enhance security across all the service lifecycle phases. Virtually every process in ITSM can be connected to security in one way or another, but there are some that I believe we've identified that they're on the front line and the ones you should really look at addressing first. People and process matters. Human errors and process gaps are the root cause of many cyber incidents. The most critical breach in infrastructure happened last year, the Salt Typhoon attack. Unpatched routers. The healthcare, United Healthcare and Fidelity, stolen or hacked credentials. I mean, people and process matters because technology alone, is not going to help you. Technology is required, but it's people and process as well. I think ITSM combined with NIST gives you stronger security because, ITSM has never done a great job of talking about things from a security perspective, but it's been doing all the stuff you need for security. And NIST tells you what you need to do from a security perspective. So when you can show your CISO that the ITSM processes are directly connected to the outcomes they need to achieve for security, I think that's a really strong case. And it really elevates the importance of the ITSM processes. But more importantly, forget the importance of, they are critical. I mean, as a company who has a SaaS application, our processes are what helps us meet security. When we have a pen test, if there are findings, they go into our system. We track them basically as problems, though they're prioritized, they're categorized, they're tracked through resolution. So I mean, all our ITSM processes connect directly with our security posture here at Navient. And continuous assessments are essential. Regular security assessments using NIST and ITSM can help identify risks and also identify improvements. Last but not least, this integrated approach, I think, is a real benefit because it looks beyond the controls. It's not enough to say, yeah, it's a checklist, we got it, but I actually have the process that supports that outcome. Taking this kind of approach is cost effective and comprehensive by using the assessment questionnaires and by going out and talking to people. You can get a lot of information and identify gaps quickly that can help plug some of these holes before you become the next person on a slide about a breach. It can uncover issues before a breach, saving you time, money, and reputation. It's aligned with leading frameworks. I mean, you're using industry recognized standards to take this approach. Helps you identify gaps and prepare for audits, demonstrate compliance, improve your reputation. And when it comes to the questionnaires that we have, they're going to be available in April 2024, so just around the corner. So that brings me to the end of today's presentation. I hope you folks found it informative. I'm here to take any questions that you might have. Catherine, were there any questions on the?
Yeah, I'm checking right now. It says here we don't have questions now.
All right, since I'm taking questions at the end, if anyone has any questions, I'd be happy to respond to those. Any comments or feedback? Did this stuff did it make sense? Not everybody always sees the connection between security and ITSM. I'm kind of curious what you folks think.
Yeah, actually, we have a question here. Is there a similar risk framework for ITAM?
For IT asset management?
Oh, ITSM, yes.
Yes, there's a direct, yes, there are questionnaires coming out for IT asset management that align directly to the NIST framework. Thank you, Edward. Appreciate that.
Yeah, so Jimmy was asking if you're gonna get a copy of the slides. Yeah, I'm gonna send an email to you today with the link to the recording and to the slides.
Thanks, Carlo. I appreciate that. Jimmy, thank you. Rick. And Rick, I'm going to be reaching out to you actually. So if you're still online, I will be reaching out to you.
Yes, Alan. Yeah, you're gonna have access to the session. So yeah, I'm gonna send a link, an email to the link with the link to the recording and the slides.
And Kavitha, just to be a little more detailed on my response. So NIST focuses heavily on IT asset management, and in our questionnaires, we have questionnaires specific to IT asset management, and we have process questionnaires specific to IT asset management.
Yeah, we have a question from Edward.
Hey, Edward. Yes, configuration management is included in that. Service asset and configuration management. Yeah, if you go through the NIST framework around the asset management piece, a whole subsection of that is around is specifically around configuration management. So it's not only knowing your assets, but knowing how your assets are connected, the relationships between those assets, how those assets fit in from a risk perspective. Like if the asset's a printer, a printer in somebody's office versus, a key business server, that's all factored into the questionnaires. Did that answer your question, Edward? You're welcome, Alberto.
Thank you, Kavitha. Appreciate it. Thank you very
Yeah,
much.
we'd be happy to connect directly with you, Kavitha. Not a problem. All right, I'll give it another minute, but it's interesting for someone who's been around the block once or twice. It's obvious to me, and it's not obvious to everybody. I know so many people struggle with ITSM programs and getting sponsorship for a service management program. I've seen companies all hot about service management, and then they stop. But I'm telling you, service management is not only good for your IT services, the life cycle of them, but it's so critical for security. And if you're an ITSM professional and you're seeing a little bit of pushback from management on having a service management office, an SMO, or having a robust service management program, this is a message I think you should convey, that how critical these processes are to security, and that many of the breaches that occur, the high visibility breaches, were a direct result of not following the service management processes correctly. So I think that's a really important takeaway.
Okay, there is another question from Edward. I'm gonna put it in the stage so you can read it.
I don't see the whole question, maybe. Hang on a second, I'm going to go to... So to read the whole question, the Internet of Things is often not managed outside of IT, healthcare, manufacturing. What approach have you taken to get IT engaged to manage the whole, anything technology related? I really think assessments like this, are one of the best. So I do recommend, if you're interested in assessments, to go look at the information, those assessment webinars we have up on our website. But there's a reason to do an assessment. Yes, you want to find out what's broke, but it's really about communication and building support for making change, right? So doing an assessment is the best way to say to somebody, you got a hole here, you got a problem. I need your support. We need to close this. So getting people involved in this process by doing an assessment and getting the folks, outside of IT to say that you're part of the attack surface. Your devices, if you have an MRI machine, and I'm not a healthcare person specifically, but the computer systems controlling that get hacked, that can take that machine offline, and there's financial implications, there's healthcare implications associated with that. So assessments are one of the best ways, I think, to build that kind of urgency, to build that desire to change by getting people involved, asking them what they're doing to secure those environments. When they start answering nothing, oh wait, I don't know, I'm not aware. It's much easier to say, hey, we can help you with that from here in the IT organization. We've got the expertise, we've got the skills, we've got the frameworks like ITSM and NIST that can help you with that. So I think that's one of the ways you can do that, Edward.
Okay, we have another question from Jimmy.
Is the NIST framework,
sorry.
Where can we insert owner responsibilities? So, a product owner is responsible for the entire service lifecycle. So as a product owner, you're there from the inception of the service, ideally, all the way through the retirement of the service. And the product owner plays a huge role in this, because if you remember how I said you can segment data in the questionnaires? Well, if you segment the service owners or the product owners as a separate group, they might have a completely different view of how secure things are. And so it's not so much you're inserting them in the group, because they're kind of like, in my mind, the product owners and the service owners, they orchestrate, right? They orchestrate, from development through operations, through support. So they're there, they're getting the SLAs back, they're driving things forward. So the product owners play a role in all of this. Functionally speaking, I think they would probably fit more in the governance side, the policies, the procedures, the controls, the roles and responsibilities, probably there. They're not technologists, they're not installing the patches, they're not the IT asset management people. But I think in the governance side, if that's what you're asking, that's probably the area that they fall most into. Yeah.
Right, David. So, sorry to interrupt. So you have a question in the comment chat, in the chat section from Jimmy. So if you go there and...
Oh yeah, Jimmy, there's actually one there today. There's the risk management process is available in Navia today. That screenshot I had on an earlier slide was right from our own the risk management template. So yes, so there's going to be a risk. So how is it going to work with all of this? There's NIST outcomes around risk. There's questionnaire for that. There's questionnaires specifically on risk management that will be coming in the April timeframe. And we have a risk management process that if you want to remediate some of the outcomes, you can take that as a starting point to build your own risk management process. So Jimmy, did that answer your question? I think so. Great. Thanks, Jimmy. And Rick, Rick made a comment here. Assessments allow you to start where you are. I'm trying to read this. Sorry, the chat is moving while I'm trying to read it. Yeah, the assessments are the only place to start. Without assessments, you're not seeing the whole thing. So great feedback, Rick.
All right. It seems we more have questions now.
Okay, well, I guess if there's any more questions, I'll wrap it up. You're going to have our email addresses when the slides and the recording go out. So if you have any follow-on questions, feel free to ask. Thanks, everyone. Have a great day.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Bye.
Bye-bye.